Hey guys, we're glad you're back for another episode of the FBC Okeechobee podcast. And here is Marie.
Here I am again.
Yes, welcome back. I guess next time Judd's home, you get a break.
Where's Corey? He can fill in too.
I don't know where
what
Corey's
happened to that?
at. Corey doesn't talk as much.
He just needs practice.
He needs practice?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you encourage him.
Okay,
I'll let you encourage him. But today, this will be interesting because we were discussing beforehand a little bit of this topic, and you were like, I don't have a lot to say about this. I think you're wrong.
We'll see.
I'm
gonna let you carry the load.
Carry the load? I don't want to carry the load. All right. So this is in Mark chapter 3, and this is where we'll start with verses 13, 14, and 15. This is about the call of the disciples. And this is an incredibly key moment, not just in Jesus' earthly ministry, but in the history of the church. Because remember, these guys are the guys that will carry on. This is some dudes that walked around with Jesus. These are the men he's choosing that will be the foundation for Christianity. They will found the church. They will lead the church. They will train the next generation of leaders for the church. I mean, these are some of the most important people that literally have ever lived. Their lives changed the world in an incredibly dramatic fashion. I think more so than we sometimes think about.
Probably.
I mean, what would the world look like without the disciples to found and carry on the message of Jesus?
I don't know.
I mean, we're all here. Like, there is a First Baptist church because of these 12 guys that were called. You know, even old Judas played his role, right?
Well, I mean, there's so many things that play a role in it. I think even you think about why does God allow certain things to happen, and how does he choose to use governments in order to further his will and things like that. And the Roman Empire, with building the road system that they had, really facilitated the disciples to go out and reach people even more than they would have been able to otherwise, don't you think?
Oh, definitely. You had a couple things playing in. You had the Greek language coming into what was common use. Like, that was the language. Like, today, English is the language around the world and has been for, a long time, going back to the British Empire, and then coming over into both the British sphere and the United States as a superpower. For that time frame, it was Greek. I mean, the entire New Testament is written in Greek, which made it so much more accessible to people because Greek was a much more common language. And then the road system you mentioned is so interesting too. God timed all this out. The Roman road system made it so easy for the gospel to spread.
I mean, I just don't think about it very often, but God is a God of details, and he has a purpose for what he does and when he does it.
Yeah.
We talked about last week the fact that there was a 400-year span where he was silent in a lot of ways, and he still, even in that, he has a purpose, and he knows the right time to do things. And he obviously had a purpose for these disciples and knew that they would be used to further his message. Yeah,
and he chose them carefully. I mean, let's look at these verses. It says, afterward, meaning after what had just occurred with the Pharisees once again. It says, afterward, Jesus went up on a mountain and called out the ones he wanted to go with him, and they came to him. Then he appointed 12 men and called them his apostles, or disciples. They were to accompany him, and he would send them out to preach, giving them authority to cast out demons. These are the 12 that he chose, and then it gives us the list. We'll talk about the list in a second. So this was a really critical point in Jesus' ministry. I mean, he was coming under a lot of opposition. Big crowds were coming, right? A lot of folks were coming to see him. But they were just coming for the show. They weren't really dedicated to him. And as we'll see towards the end of his ministry, turned on him like that, didn't they? I mean, when he rolls into town on Palm Sunday, it's a much different group that he sees
3 days later.
Yeah, that he sees a few days later when they bring him in front of the crowds and they, shout, crucify him. So the crowd was fickle. The crowd has always been fickle. I mean, just look around at the world around us. You know, you can talk about turn on you in a second. You know, say the wrong thing at the wrong moment right now, and whoo, will the crowd turn on you.
Yeah.
And that's something I was talking about in a mini message that I recorded earlier today that'll be released a bit later this week, was that people haven't changed. Our technology has grown. We think we're so much better and more civilized. We're really not. The same exact stuff that we dealt with in the past, we deal with today. I mean, we know that there are more people actually in slavery today than there ever has been any other time in human history.
Right.
They're in places like India, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, the Far East. It's where
the majority are. There are slaves in America.
Sex trafficking and sex slaves and things like that are happening in America. That's just atrocious stuff, and we need to do everything we can to stop that.
But we tend to look at our own culture, at least society today does. I don't know how they would have done it in the past, but we look at ourselves today and we think of ourselves as being more enlightened or better. I wouldn't have made this choice. I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have had a slave, or I wouldn't have thought this thing. I wouldn't have treated women poorly or denigrated this group of people. But
maybe you would have.
I mean, you can't. It's hard to view people of the past in current circumstances or with today's.
If societal pressure is in a different place, would you conform to it even if it was the wrong thing?
Because we all conform to society's pressures or struggle with it at least.
It's hard to push back against what the society and culture is pushing. That was one of the things with Jesus. He pushed back against society. He pushed back against the Pharisees and what culture was. They were kind of controlling the culture. He pushed back against them. That was a difficult thing for him to do.
And in calling these disciples, he's asking them to do the same thing.
Yes.
And they're having to, like you said, push back against society. And if we are called by God today, we can't just say that because we live in a Western culture that everything that our society today in America says is right, because it isn't.
No, it goes back to what God says is right is right.
Right. I mean, abortion is considered by a majority to be okay today, and that is killing a child, and it is not okay.
No, it is not.
And the fact that we are allowing ourselves to become complacent and go with the flow, I don't think that that's what God's calling us to do. And he called the disciples and had them make hard choices. And I think he's calling us to do the same thing. And it can be scary. And
to go against the flow. To go against the flow. Jesus did it. The disciples did it. And let's all get honest for a second. What happened to all of them?
Yeah, it didn't.
They nailed Jesus to a cross. They nailed Peter to a cross upside down. If I remember right, it was Matthew he was killed in Egypt. He was drugged behind a horse until he was dead. That's a pretty tough way to go. Thomas was burned at the stake. History tells us that happened to him in India. He made it as far as India. There's some extra biblical history, whether how super reliable all of it is or not, that some of the disciples made it as far as England, Spain, all the way across Africa to places like Morocco. Thomas made it to India. So like when they scattered, brother, they scattered. They weren't playing no games. And every single one of them gave their life. They gave their life for what they believed. And they went against the grain of culture in that moment and stood on the truth of Scripture and the gospel. You know, so they gave their lives.
I feel like we all give our lives for what we believe. So if we are giving our life to comfort over the message of God and truth, then I don't know, I feel like we're giving our life to that and we're agreeing to that. And I don't know, I struggle with it too. I don't like to be uncomfortable either.
Yeah. I've kind of come to a place that I've drawn my line and I know where my line is, and I'm kind of prepared for that. I've kind of drawn my line back. Here's my spot. Here's where I'm at.
Right. I struggle a little bit because I get complacent in thinking that people don't, if they don't agree, they don't want to hear, and I'm not going to change their mind about it. So I don't know. I don't think that that's necessarily the right way to be, but I don't know what platform would be effective to, I don't know, speak truth in that way, I guess. I'm not really sure. It's just something that I'm having to think about and pray about, and hope that God opens my eyes to see where He's calling me to speak truth and to be brave enough to do it when He calls me to.
Yeah. I think that just like the disciples had to be brave and step forward. And they were men. I mean, right after Jesus was crucified, what were they doing? They were hiding, They were just, they were normal people.
Right.
They had to get their act together. And I think one of the things that helped to get their act together was they saw the risen Christ. That kind of shot them off in a different direction. Right. But we all get to that point, and we have to decide, what's my spot? Where's my line that I will not a step further? And that's, it's personal. For the disciples, it was absolutely the gospel, that it was not a step further. And they were ready, willing, and able to give their lives, and every one of them did but John. And John's outcome wasn't exactly great. I mean, he wants to be put, the island of Patmos, where he wound up, was a prison island. He wasn't exactly hanging out with, little old ladies drinking some lemonade and, eating a cookie. It was not a pleasant thing. So it was very bad for all of them, and so they had to know going into this that Jesus was not the popular person with the elite. That he was
not with the elite, but he was pretty popular.
He's popular with the people
at the time that he called them.
Yeah, and some of them did think. Remember, I think the majority of them thought.
Which two was it?
Yeah.
That had to fight about who's going to be on your right and who's going to be on your left.
Yeah. That was.
Was it Peter?
No, it was James and John. It was James and John, and it was actually their mother. James and John's mother. So mom got involved. There was a helicopter parent before there were helicopter parents.
Every mom in history has wanted to further their child.
Who knew James and John had helicopter parents? But their mom actually asked for them to sit in the place of honor when he entered into his kingdom. So even they thought maybe this would turn out a little different. That they knew he wasn't popular, but with the elite, but that he would overthrow them was the thought process that they had, and he will. They just missed the timing. But at the end of the day, they figured it all out and they got it right, and these men changed the world. Now, an interesting thing here in verse 13, it says, afterward Jesus went up on a mountain. Now, Luke gives us more detail. Remember, Mark is the most basic of the Gospels as far as details. Some of the other Gospels give us greater detail of these different accounts, especially Matthew and Luke compared to Mark. So it just says he went up on a mountain. You go to the same thing in Luke, it tells us he went up there and he prayed all night before he chose them. He prayed over this. He knew how important this decision was.
I don't think I had ever realized that.
Yeah, he prayed over it all night. And that's fascinating to me, and something's always been fascinating to me is Jesus spent extended periods of time in prayer. I understand exactly why I need to do that.
Right.
But as a kid especially, I was like, why does Jesus need to pray?
I'm with you. Yeah.
It's God already. But remember from the book of Philippians that he didn't hold on to that equality with the Father. He set that aside. He was still God. He was still perfect. He was sinless. He was eternal. But he set aside that power and lived as a person and related to the Father just as we do. He had the Holy Spirit, and he related to God the Father just like us. He literally walked a mile in our shoes. He lived just like we did.
But don't you think, that it's feasible that he missed that fellowship?
Oh, definitely.
If you are in fellowship with God.
Yeah. Because the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and there wasn't disunity or separation. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the same type of thing that they would have had in heaven over the course of not just history, but even before history. But there was still that close fellowship. I mean, this is, when the Father says, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased." We talked about that at his baptism. But he did live in his relationship with the Father much more like us.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an important decision, and I think he wanted to make sure he got it right. Because...
Which, again, it almost sounds blasphemous because it makes it seem that he didn't know who is this that I'm supposed to be choosing, and then that it seems to imply doubt that he isn't sure.
Was it doubt? Was it confirmation? Was he seeking the Father for confirmation?
I have no idea. I hesitate
Was
to
he
even...
asking for approval? Was he, or did he, apart from that time in prayer with the Spirit, not know exactly which ones? And he waited on the Father to speak to him.
I have no idea.
To do that. It's incredibly interesting when you think about who Christ really is and the fact that he had a need for prayer. But this is an incredibly important decision we kind of opened with. These are the guys that are going to change the world. I mean, there are not more important people that have ever lived than these 12 guys. They are some of the pinnacle. I mean, we talk about, Winston Churchill, incredibly important person, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson.
He could be haggling over that Judas fellow that's going to be...
Yeah, no, he played an important role too.
Yeah.
And Jesus knew that too.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. He knew Judas would betray him. But always remember, he didn't make Judas betray him.
I don't know. I hesitate to even say that he's wondering who they are, because when I'm trying to remember what scenario it was, but at one point he told one of the disciples that, and this is what you did over here, and he knew things that only God can know about people's thoughts or about words that they said. Not even
he does that with the Pharisees.
Not even in his presence.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
And then there was also the woman at the well. He tells her everything that she had ever done.
Right. So maybe he's not praying about who is this. Maybe he's praying for them.
Maybe so.
Maybe
so.
Because he's asking them for a lot.
Yeah. Because that's always been a fascinating thing to me in thinking about it, is his need to pray. What was at the heart of that? And I'm sure there's somebody really way, way, way smarter than me that I just haven't read their thoughts yet that they put down on paper that would explain that all, absolutely perfectly. But I get it. I mean, I understand. And he does it consistently. Mm-hmm. This isn't a one-time occurrence. He does this all the time. After John the Baptist is beheaded and he sends the disciples away, and that's the night that he walks on water. He went up to be by himself and he prayed. So there's multiple occasions that these kind of things happen while he's up on these prayer vigils. The Garden of Gethsemane. What did he do? He stayed up. He stayed up praying until they came to get him. He sweated blood. So this is an integral part of him. And in choosing these disciples, he bathed that in prayer in whatever form that might have took, as we've discussed a couple of different ideas.
Options.
Because we don't have the prayer recorded. We don't know exactly what he said. We just know he did it. And in choosing these men, I mean, at the end of the day, to be honest, he chose wisely. Now, it's an interesting group because it's not a group that you would think the Messiah would choose. I mean, these guys are kind of all over the place. He calls them to himself. He talks about he'll send them out to preach, and he does, that he gives them the power to cast out demons, and he does. But they were an interesting group, to say the least. What would be a good word? They were an eclectic bunch. Mm-hmm. When you look at them, because you go on down to verses 16 through 19, and it lists them. So this is who they are: Simon Peter. Okay. Then you had James and John. Those are the sons of Zebedee, and Jesus nicknamed them the sons of thunder. Then you had Andrew, who's Peter's brother. Then you had Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus. So I got two Jameses. Then I got Thaddeus. Then I got Simon the Zealot. So I got two Simons. So I got two James, two Simons. So if I can remember James and Simon, I'm a third of the way there. Okay. Then we have Judas listed last, and it says there, who later betrayed him. Neat part about this, we don't know much about most of these guys. I mean, what do we know about Judas? We know about him as the betrayer. But prior to that, we don't really know a lot. We know he kept the money and that he stole from them. That's about it. Simon the Zealot, we know from the Zealot side that he was part of like a almost political party. It was a radical group that wanted to throw the Romans out violently.
Which kind of makes sense why he would be willing to follow Christ.
All right, yep. I think you might be.
Yeah, you're the one.
You're going to be on the throne of David. You're my guy.
Yeah,
so I do
right
get that.
There with you.
James, son of Alphaeus, really not much. Thomas, doubting Thomas. We have the when Jesus appeared and he said, put your fingers, put your hands in the hole of my side. And so that's what we got about him. Matthew, we know, the tax collector. But after that, we don't really know a lot about him. Bartholomew and Philip, we got next to nothing. Andrew, we do have some things about Andrew a little bit deeper. James and John and Peter were the three leading ones that we probably know more about than anybody else. So the disciples were chosen, and they're these incredibly important people, but the Bible doesn't tell us a ton about them. You can go to the book of Acts. After Acts chapter 8, we're pretty much just focused on Paul. The first 8 chapters of Acts cover a little more. We get more about Peter. We get more about John. We get more about James. But we talk about the Pentecost. We talk about the first set of deacons. But we don't have a chapter in the book of Acts dedicated to Thaddeus over here. So they're not well fleshed out people. We don't know a ton about them. And to be a disciple was, we think about that as that's a follower, right? They're following a teacher, and it literally meant that for them. They followed him everywhere he went. They listened to his teaching. They tried to mimic him. Socrates would have had disciples. John the Baptist is referred to as having disciples. Mm-hmm. So these men were going to be those close confidants that Jesus would pour into them and teach them, and they would be the ones that would carry on the gospel after he was gone. They had no idea of this, but that's what their job was. But throughout the Gospels and the book of Acts, we don't get a ton of information about them. We know from the book of Revelation that their names are written on the foundation of heaven.
Just mind-blowing.
So you're famous in heaven. Mm-hmm. So I may not know much about Thaddeus, but Thaddeus' name's on the foundation of the city. It's pretty powerful. I don't know a lot about Bartholomew over here. He got the same spot. So obviously these are important folks. And where's it more important to be famous? Here or in heaven?
Yeah.
So
you're shooting for the long game.
They definitely shot for the long game. And then the other thing that you think about is so many people, their lives don't really make that much of an impact. You're gone. Maybe for most people, once their grandkids are gone, nobody even really knows them or remembers them. They're a headstone somewhere. Maybe they were super famous, but even then, how much do we know about Calvin Coolidge? He's president of the United States.
I know. I think it was a Disciple Now material that I read one time, and it challenged the kids to say who was the gold medal winner in some sport in the Olympics 20 years ago or something like that. And no one knew. It was a big honor, but no one knew who that was. Or this Miss America from so many years ago, nobody knew. And
I can't name a Miss America in my lifetime.
I know, all of these things that you would think are great life achievements, but nobody's going to remember that. Unless you are just really into that, very few people will remember that. Yeah. But then it asks them to say, name one person who has made a difference in your life.
Snap that off.
Exactly. Or someone who has been kind to you. And so everyone can think of that one person who has been that for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a great example of how we can know that our life means something by being present with the people that God puts in front of us and being Christ to them in whatever form that may take, for a neighbor or for a family member or a student, if you're a teacher, or all these different ways that we can show the love of God to someone else and be someone important in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not for the whole world, but for other individuals that God puts in front of us.
And the thing that comes back to that is, like that football player that won the Super Bowl in 1992, all right? Outside of his family, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
But something that I've talked about before is if I make an impact on one individual and their life is changed, I lead one person to Christ, that has the potential to impact generations moving forward. Like that. And I got examples from my life, and I'm very blessed to have those examples of you make an impact on this one person. Now they grow up, they get married, they have a family, they're raising their child as a Christian. I got some of those that I'm so blessed to have that, I was able to lead them to Christ. Now they're pastors themselves, and they're out there impacting all these other people. So that ripple mm-hmm. effect, it's like throwing the rock in the pond. Some of these things that we think is so important really isn't. Like, I don't know a lot about Thomas outside of the brief moments we see him in the Gospels, but I know Thomas was there. I know he was there in the book of Acts. I know he was one of the ones that was teaching. He was one of the ones that was leading. He was one of the ones that everybody in the church turned to and looked to for leadership because he had followed Christ since the beginning. I mean, we're in Mark chapter 3 here. This is still very early in the situation. He had been following him. And so even though I may not know a lot about him personally, like I could pick up and read a biography of Thomas Jefferson, his impact on the world is almost beyond measure because the ripple that went out from him, he was there at Pentecost that day. He was there helping found the church. He was there teaching that first generation of Christians. Mm-hmm. So these folks made an incredible impact.
Well, and I think that to tie it back to sort of what we talked about at the beginning, in that we view ourselves with rose-colored glasses and mm-hmm. think that if I was in a different time period, I would have been one of the disciples.
I'd have been Andrew.
I would have been this great person in history, or I would have marched, mm-hmm. For this right, or I would have done this or that. Don't think of yourself as being so righteous if you're not willing to be that person for your neighbor.
Yeah.
Or if you're not willing to step out right now in the position that you have and step out of your comfort zone to reach someone for Christ.
Because they did.
In the situation you're in.
Yeah.
I think that...
And for them in this day, it was harder.
Exactly.
It was harder than what we deal with. There's other parts of the world that are happening right now that may have been even harder than the disciples. Go try sharing the gospel in North Korea. See how that works out for you. Mm-hmm. Head over to Iran. Like, there's places where they'll literally chop your head off, just like they did Paul, right? I mean, there's some bad spots out there. I believe it was Nero who was responsible for Paul's execution. That's how it is. We are so blessed. It is so easy to tell people about Christ in the place we're at right now. Will it be like that forever? I highly doubt it.
Doesn't seem that that's the direction we're heading.
It doesn't.
Into
but at this moment,
easier...
we still have that. And so these men stepped out when it was much more difficult.
Yeah.
We can step out right where we're at. And I'm not saying you got to be like Peter, James, and John and drop your fishing business and walk off from your family, because they all did that.
I think we just need to say yes to the opportunities that God puts in
Whatever
front of us.
It is. Mm-hmm. And if it is drop your business and walk away, that's where God has you to go, then so be it. Never thought I'd live in Okeechobee, Florida. Here I am, and I'm blessed for it. God is good.
Yeah.
So, but I've enjoyed our conversation today. You said you wouldn't have anything to talk about.
Well,
turns out you did.
I guess so.
But I've enjoyed it. Very good. All right. Well, we will see you guys again soon at the FBC Okeechobee podcast.